G'day listeners and welcome to another APS News Bulletin, keeping you up to date and well informed on the Australian property market and everything that's happening out there in real time. Guys, jumping straight into it this week, Article 1, Millennials fuel property investment boom through rentvesting. This is straight from the BuzzFeed news desk, guys. Millennials are driving a surge in property investment, increasingly turning to rentvesting as a way to enter the market and build wealth. Rentvesting, where investors rent their primary residence while owning an investment property elsewhere or building a portfolio elsewhere, is appealing to younger Australians who want to remain flexible in their living arrangements while still getting a foot on the property ladder. Commonwealth Bank data supports this trend, showing that millennials make up 46% of the bank's new property investors in 2023. For some context as well, guys, on the size of millennials out there in the marketplace as well, they're obviously born between 1981 and 1996, and this cohort as of today right now is between 28 and 43 years of age. There's over 5.84 million millennials in Australia, and this is interesting, guys. This generation is expected to grow by more than 108,000 people per annum over the next 5 years. If this happens, millennials will account for a fifth of the Australia's population between 24 and 29, making this generation the second largest age-related growth sector after baby boomers in this period. Now, you might ask, and I was thinking this for half a second when I read that part of the article as well, how does this generation obviously boom? Well, obviously, it's the amount of people currently migrating to Australia. There's a very dominant group that is in that millennial age bracket. And what I think is really important to note is that kind of, the baby boomers are the only ones in front of them, and they're transitioning into retirement or retiring at the moment, or already retired, such a huge portion of those guys. Now, they're typically already in the market, or they may be selling things off and whatnot. So it's really important to kind of note that this is really such a growing sector in the marketplace right now. You look at CommBank as well, guys, like their data showing that millennials making up 46% of property investment purchases in 2023, showing that a massive amount of the marketplace is coming from that segment of the market. Now, obviously, guys, while rentvesting isn't a new idea or investing methodology, this younger generation are obviously realizing the potential in it and renting where they want to live at significantly cheaper rents than it would cost to actually own and pay a mortgage on that house as well. So we're seeing a big shift towards this at the moment, but then also those people now obviously going or realizing that they need to invest elsewhere and they need to invest their money out there in the marketplace to make something happen. So crazy percentage there, guys. Almost half of property investment loans through CommBank in 23 were through the millennial generation. I think it's a really important sort of thing seeing there. And so many of that age group now getting out there and buying in the marketplace, they're renting where they want to live. They're realizing they don't need to own that primary residence, and it's fueling a lot of people out there getting out there and buying, obviously in that kind of more affordable brackets as well. If they're renting, obviously trying to get something that's going to take care of itself or as close as possible. So we're seeing a lot of shift towards that as well. And I can happily say a huge amount of Australian Property Scout clients are also following this trend. And we're seeing some people literally selling off a primary residence. They think the market's at a peak. They'll go rent in the same location where it's significantly less to rent there than own it. And then they're using both the capital and the borrowing capacity that they're getting from that to then go out and start building their portfolios elsewhere. So really cool sort of thing to see out there in the market as well, guys, and something that I think over the next few years is only going to get stronger and stronger. Article number 2 today, guys, is planning powers could be stripped from councils that miss housing targets. This is an article directly from The Age. Victorian councils that miss targets for new housing supply face being stripped of planning powers as the Allen government looks to dramatically increase the supply and affordability of homes. Developers would also be hit with a universal livability charge across all postcodes, replacing a much maligned infrastructure contribution charge that currently only applies to the metropolitan fringe. Under proposals being considered in the second stage of Labor's push for more homes, housing targets will be written into local planning schemes and require council planners, councillors, and Victorian civil and administrative tribunal members to consider them when weighing up approving housing developments. Sources within and close to the government said carrot-stick measures were being considered to pressure councils into approving more housing. They include the state seizing planning control over key precincts from councils that do not meet targets and a bigger pot of infrastructure funding for those that do. The sources who spoke on the condition of anonymity, as they are not authorised to speak publicly, have confirmed that the government is considering replacing its growth areas infrastructure contribution charge that currently applies only to developments on metropolitan fringe with a new universal livability charge across all suburbs and towns. Now, guys, the development follows warnings that Victoria has little hope of delivering an average 80,000 new homes every year for the next decade, promised in last year's landmark housing statement. In the early 2000s, the Brax Labor government introduced targets as part of its Melbourne 2030 plan to consolidate the city. However, no implementation plan was brought in and no obligation on councils to achieve the targets. That was soon forgotten. 20 years later, amid a worsening housing crisis, the Allen government is determined to get more homes built in established suburbs and to rein in sprawl. Now, guys, obviously a bit of a media article there, but effectively what it is it's the Victorian government going out there trying to really, or they're putting the pressure on at the moment that if local governments aren't putting the things together to allow developments to go through more quickly and getting developments approved more quickly and more of them, that they're talking about stepping in there and making this something that they take control of, so then they can actually go through the planning process and get more homes and more lands and everything sort of, delivered to market as well. It's actually not a bad thing to sort of see because it's people stepping in. And I remember when I used to do developments when I was younger, and I got a lot of friends that are developers as well. The biggest thing they always had to combat was local planning, like government. So you might have your local council blocking certain developments from getting through for a lot of different factors. And so often what we used to see was the guys who always got their developments through were quite often either on the board of council or in town planning or whatnot as well. It was a very corrupt system, to be blunt. And so effectively what they're talking about here is taking that out of the hands of local governments if they can't deliver on their targets. So they're going to put targets into this thing, and then if they can't deliver on it, they're talking about potentially taking that power and giving it to the actual government, the state government, so then they can approve things and get them through more quickly. On top of it, they're also trying to stop the urban sprawl, right? So Melbourne's always been considered one of those urban sprawl cities of Australia. Sydney is much more landlocked by ocean, national parks, and mountain ranges, whereas Melbourne is much more urban sprawl. They're talking about trying to limit the urban sprawl and build up rather than out. So it'll be very interesting to see how this sort of plays out and how many local governments actually, accept this thing and try and push more through versus the government actually going in there and stripping them of those powers. So it's one of those things, guys, that which I've been in the game now for 15 years. And almost at the very start of my journey, I was developing. I knew other people that did. This is something that people have always struggled with. So it'll be really interesting. And when I say people, I'm talking about developers always struggling with local councils. So it'll be really interesting to see if those difficult councils that have always been really difficult to work with and to get planning permits through, if they get overruled and get those powers taken off them, it could be a bit of a game changer out there in the marketplace. So it'll be a little bit of a watch and see with this one, guys. But I think it's a really interesting article and something that's going to be really interesting to watch play out. Now, guys, that's a wrap up for this week's weekly news bulletin. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please send it on to someone else who also might take some great value. And until next week, guys, that's another APS News Bulletin on the Scouting Australia podcast.